former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger has died. That's according to his consulting firm, Kissinger Associates. He was 100 years old. A statement says that he passed away at his home today in Connecticut. Kissinger, of course, was Secretary of State under Presidents Nixon and Ford, the only person to ever serve as the National Security Advisor and Secretary of State at the same time. More now on his legacy.
I know all of you will want to hear from the new Secretary of State.
Henry Kissinger never really needed an introduction on the world stage again. Kissinger, the most famous statesman of the last half of the 20th century. Celebrated and controversial.
I'm not going to make any sense.
As Richard Nixon's national security advisor and Secretary of State, the diplomat wielded enormous power and influence. So trusted that it was Kissinger who went to China on a secret mission to explore a historic opening of U.S. relations with Communist China.
Whoever went would be alone in Beijing with no communication. And therefore, if he didn't know Nixon's mind, he might do foolish things.
Initially, there were fears a U.S.-China ping-pong exchange match would affect the high-stakes political gambit.
Every once in a while, something happens in diplomacy which transcends the drafting of cables.
Vietnam. Casualties mounted as the Vietnamese gained territory. Nixon and an undiplomatic Kissinger thought more bombing of the North would help.
I would then recommend that you start bombing to the cheapest hours than within 48 hours.
Kissinger approved secret bombings of North Vietnamese units in Cambodia without congressional approval. He would say sometimes statesmen have to choose among evils, moral compromises in messy conflicts. Kissinger and his Vietnamese counterpart, Le Duc Tho, were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their role in negotiating a ceasefire.
I have to say, I have never dealt with a group of people as treacherous as the North Vietnamese leadership.
Kissinger insisted trouble on the home front hurt chances to succeed in Vietnam.
We lost the war because we were divided, and also because we were too uncertain about what we wanted.
Kissinger's support for a coup in Chile and pro-U.S. military strongmen in other parts of the world drew criticism.
Arrest Henry Kissinger for war crimes!
Kissinger's legacy would be contested decades later when he testified in Congress at the age of 91. Kissinger grew up in Germany with war clouds swirling. His family fled when he was 15.
About half of the people I went to school with and about 13 members of my own family died in concentration camps.
A Jewish Secretary of State who would later listen to his president criticize American Jewish leaders.
It's about goddamn time that these Jew in America realize he's an American person, a Jew second. Well, I couldn't agree more.
I only heard anti-Semitic comments when some Jewish group would attack him for something he had done.
In the Middle East, Kissinger performed what came to be known as shuttle diplomacy to separate Israeli and Arab forces, setting the stage for future peace accords. When Nixon resigned as president, Kissinger stayed on as Gerald Ford's Secretary of State. His opinion still widely sought after by governments and businesses after leaving public office.
You want to leave your country better off than you found it. And there's nothing in private life you can do that's as interesting and as fulfilling.
There was one job Kissinger said he never got to do in his life, a sports announcer.
Derek who?
However, the globe-trotting diplomat did star in some of history's biggest games.
For more now on Henry Kissinger's legacy, for those just tuning in, we have now confirmed Henry Kissinger has died at the age of 100. I want to bring in CNN presidential historian Tim Naftali, who joins me now on the phone. Tim, thank you for hopping on the phone for this breaking news. I mean, just as we start here and as we look at this moment, can you just put his long legacy in shaping foreign affairs into perspective?
Well, Henry Kissinger was a towering figure in U.S. foreign relations, both admired and hated. He was the most consequential foreign policy maker of the superpower era. He didn't do it alone. He and Richard Nixon were a powerful team, but Kissinger provided a genius for playing multi-level diplomatic chess, which allowed the U.S. government and the Nixon administration to implement Nixon's policies, the most famous of which, of course, was the opening to China. Henry Kissinger began his career as a professor, as an academic at Harvard, thinking about U.S. foreign policy, in particular, thinking about nuclear weapons and their utility in the struggle with the Soviet Union. He sought power himself. He initially was an advisor to the Kennedy administration when he didn't feel that he was listened to. He offered himself to Nelson Rockefeller, who was a Republican, governor of New York. He later provided some assistance to the Johnson administration, but found his home ultimately as the implementer and chief advisor to Richard Nixon. And it is the Nixon-Kissinger team that would be the most consequential of any team in U.S. foreign policy until the end of the Cold War. After he left Washington, he remained significant, not only as a conduit between American foreign policy leaders and leaders that Kissinger had known, but Kissinger was the man to see if you wanted to meet the latest American president. So Kissinger is not only significant in shaping the policies of one presidency as both a national security advisor, then a secretary of state, then both, but he would become a signal figure, an important figure for those trying to understand U.S. foreign policy for decades. Indeed, after his 100th birthday, Henry Kissinger was an honored guest in China. And for the Chinese, Kissinger was a symbol of a relationship with the United States that, frankly, doesn't really exist anymore. Kissinger was also extremely controversial because he and Nixon had undertaken extremely controversial policies. The Christmas bombing and the overturning of the Allende government in Chile.
And you know what I'm thinking about, just Tim, being here on the ground in Tel Aviv as this news is breaking, is his role here in the Middle East. I mean, in the efforts that he undertook to forge a peace, you know, after the 1973 war and what that looked like. And just, can you talk about that influence that he had, particularly on this region in that moment?
Well, he had enormous influence, first of all, because the president of the United States was largely incapacitated during the Yom Kippur War. Nixon was dealing with the acceleration of the Watergate scandal and the start of the impeachment inquiry. And for all intents and purposes, Henry Kissinger was directing U.S. foreign policy during the Yom Kippur crisis. After the crisis, Kissinger, with Nixon's approval, of course, but Kissinger undertook the most complicated set of negotiations to establish a lasting ceasefire on both the northern border with Syria and the border with Egypt in the south. That took enormous effort and was a real diplomatic achievement on the part of Henry Kissinger. So he is remembered as a very significant figure in the history of the Middle East. And let's not also forget that he undertook very strenuous negotiations with the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese, which led to the end of the American dimension of the Vietnam Civil War. So Henry Kissinger was the most significant diplomatist of the Cold War, without exception.